Hi 2222, my name is Katie, I use they them pronouns, and I have loved Buffy for a long time. I'm excited to share my passion for this TV show with you today and talk a little bit about vampire myths and queer metaphor. I'm going to start out with some basic facts about Buffy and its creator, Joss Whedon. Then, we'll talk about the origins of the vampire and analyze how accurate the portrayals of vampires are on the series. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about how vampires have been used to represent social issues and their use as a queer metaphor. Let's dive in. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was originally a 1992 black comedy horror film directed by Fran Rubel Kuzui. It followed a Valley Girl cheerleader named Buffy who learns that it is her fate to hunt vampires. And it was bad. Kuzui took the film in a different direction than its writer Joss Whedon had intended. I'll show you a short clip so you can get the gist.
Christy Swanson.
I am so sure.
Donald Sutherland. Paul Rubens. With Rutger Hauer and Luke Perry.
Buffy, you're not like other girls.
Yes, I am.
Buffy, the Vampire Slayer.
I didn't even break a nail.
It was really bad. Luckily for us, 5 years later, Whedon had the opportunity to create a television series that was much more in line with his original vision. Let's take a look at a quick logo trailer that does a pretty good job of capturing the spirit of the 7-season epic.
Greetings from beautiful Sunnydale, California. It's a pretty normal town, except that it's sitting on top of a f***ing portal to hell!
Give us a kiss.
Fierce.
Our lives are different than other people.
I'm the Slayer.
Whoa, have you tried not being a slayer?
I was thinking about shopping.
Save the world, go to the mall. Bloody hell.
Sleep with a guy and he goes all evil.
The whole having a soul, I started it.
Hello, gay now.
Buffy on logo.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the television version, was created by Joss Whedon under his production company Mutant Enemy Productions. It premiered on March 10th, 1997 on the WB, and concluded on UPN on May 20th, 2003, after 144 episodes. It reached between 4 and 6 million viewers on original airings and resulted in a spin-off called Angel and several comics. There's even a scholarly journal called Slayage dedicated to the study of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The series follows Buffy Summers, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, the latest in a line of teen girls called Vampire Slayers, or Chosen Ones. Slayers are magically chosen to fight off forces of darkness, including, obviously, vampires. Buffy is supported by a watcher named Giles and a circle of close friends known as the Scooby Gang. Buffy is told in a serialized format, with each hour-long episode involving a self-contained story while contributing to a larger storyline. Generally, these storylines are season-long and are marked by the rise and defeat of a major villain, commonly referred to as the Big Bad. The show is mainly a comedic drama, but most episodes blend genres, including horror, martial arts, romance, and even musical comedy. Whedon was born in New York City in 1956 to Tom Whedon, a TV writer, and Anne Stearns, a radical feminist and teacher. One of Whedon's first ventures was the 1992 Buffy film. He co-wrote Toy Story in 1995, earning him an Oscar nom, and went on to become a household name as the creator of the Buffy television series. Although he's best known for his work in television, he also wrote and directed the Avengers film and Avengers: Age of Ultron. I couldn't find much information about his family's religious background, but Whedon himself is quite vocal about his own views, calling himself, quote, a very hard-line, angry atheist, end quote. When he accepted the Harvard Humanist chaplaincy in 2009, Whedon stated, quote, faith in God means believing absolutely in something with no proof whatsoever. Faith in humanity means believing absolutely in something with a huge amount of proof to the contrary. We are the true believers, end quote. He has also described himself as an absurdist and an existentialist. So what, then, are the ideological underpinnings of Buffy? Let's let Whedon tell us what he thinks.
I had a need to see a girl fight monsters and not die. I had a need to see somebody's high school journey writ large. Vampires are a wonderful metaphor because they're the other the sort of monstrous, isolated creature, but that we all can relate to, especially when we're in high school. But they happen to be the most beautiful, sexy, perfect, usually sort of vaguely wealthy and well-dressed version. It's not, we're not up there with our hunchbacks ringing the bells. We're not in the
zombie bad
exactly Phantom of the Opera. It's like, no, vampires are are Frank Langella.
That's who does it for you, Frank
I'm sorry,
Langella.
honestly, Frank Langella's Dracula is still the hottest vampire on record.
This is maybe the moment where I should mention that Joss Whedon has been named by several Buffy collaborators and others as a pretty terrible, abusive person to work with. I wish I could dive deeper into the complicated nature of appreciating art made by horrible people, but unfortunately I don't have time to do that justice in this presentation. Let's move on to fictional vampires, shall we?
Stories of blood-sucking monsters are universal and have been around for centuries. There's the Greek Lamia, the Chinese Changxi, and the African Asanbosam, to name a few. Stories of blood-sucking monsters constantly shifts to reflect the culture and issues of its time. For instance, there are real-life diseases with symptoms similar to the traits found in some vampires. A sensitivity to light, a sudden decline in health, even the desire to bite other people. So before we understood concepts like viruses and germs, creating a fictional explanation makes a lot of sense. Also, if you look at the sharp teeth and long fingernails of the typical Western vampire and how they use these to attack their prey, the vampire becomes a metaphor for humans' capacity for great violence. Vampires often appear humanoid and primarily attack humans, so associating their violent attacks with the violence we see in the real world is easy, because both predator and prey look like us. We can find this monster in folklore, legends, and literature long before the word vampire appears for the first time in English around 1730. However, it wasn't until the Irish author Abraham Bram Stoker wrote his 1897 novel Dracula that the characteristics of this creature became widely recognizable in the modern world.
As Dr. Emily Zerka notes in her video, Stoker's Dracula popularized one version of a worldwide mythological phenomenon of undead, blood-sucking beasts. Dracula is mainly a product of Slavic folklore, with some original additions made by Stoker. The vampires we're familiar with are generally understood to be direct descendants of Stoker's vampire. Some of the main characteristics of vampires are, first and foremost, that they drink blood. They also usually have pointy teeth and fingernails, can fly, sire other vampires, and shapeshift into animals like bats and rats. They don't have a reflection and must be invited into a home to be able to enter it. They're vulnerable to garlic, crosses, sunlight, fire, and holy water, and can only be killed by beheading, staking, or immolation. Overall, the portrayals of vampires on Buffy are pretty close to the accepted Dracula version of the vampire. There's no flying or turning into bats, largely because of budget constraints, and as far as I can tell, their fingernails are totally normal. Their abilities and vulnerabilities are otherwise exactly what I listed previously. One thing I'd like to touch on, though, is the addition of bumpy foreheads. Whedon wanted to have high school students that the other characters could interact with normally, only to discover that these people would turn out to be vampires, heightening our sense of paranoia. So vampires on Buffy look like normal people until it's time to feed or fight, when their vamp faces emerge. Whedon has also contextualized this decision by saying, quote, "I didn't think I really wanted to put a show on the air about a high school girl who was stabbing normal-looking people in the heart. When they are clearly monsters, it takes it to a level of fantasy that is safer." End quote. Scholar A. Asbjorn John has noted that, quote, "The modern-day vampire is an undead beast that has undergone an extensive process of evolution or mythicization and remythicization." End quote. Part of this remythicization is the use of vampires as metaphors for social taboos. Let's take a look at some of the ways we can metaphorically understand vampires.
Urbanism, immigration, sexually transmitted disease, politics, corporate greed, capitalism, racism, sexism, the fetishization of youth. These are only a few of the things vampires have represented.
Starting with Dracula in 1931, vampires quickly switched from disgusting monsters of Count Orlok to sex symbols like Bela Lugosi, showing just how easily the vampire can change and how the vampire can mean something sexual.
Some of the images that we have in Western culture of things that are horrific are also basically sexual. Basically, vampirism is just sex from the neck up. You're penetrating a passive person. It really is a very sexual sort of monster.
So why do I think the vampires on Buffy the Vampire Slayer act as a specifically queer metaphor? Fact. Well, scholar Melissa Ames has stated that, quote, vampirism and sexuality have been bedfellows since the first vampire narratives began to dominate print literature in the 18th century, end quote. When we couple that with the knowledge that vampires have often represented the other, standing in as metaphors for social taboos, how can we not understand vampires as an expression of queer sexualities? Additionally, there's the sociopolitical context of the era when Buffy was being made. In 1995, AIDS was the leading cause of death for Americans ages 25 to 44, and I don't think there's any way we can understand vampire media made after the 1980s without talking about the politics of blood and bloodborne infections. As scholar Carlin Levine puts it, the literary link between queer, undead, and blood became juxtaposed onto the suddenly immediate links between queer, blood, and HIV, end quote. There are so many things that I could talk about when discussing Buffy as a queer text. It was one of the first television shows that depicted a lesbian relationship, and one of the first times I saw my own identity reflected in popular culture. The aesthetics of horror depicted on the show are undeniably campy and kinky, and there are subversions of heteronormativity in so many different ways on the show. The understanding of vampires as a queer metaphor is just the icing on a very gay cake. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't seen Buffy before and you want to experience this awesome show, check it out on Prime and let me know what you think. Thanks!